All right, everyone. Let us begin. Well, good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is James Moschella. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Climate and Health Program Manager at Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility. Here at WPSR, our mission is to engage the community to create a healthy, peaceful, just, and sustainable world. We envision a world where all live healthy lives free from threats of nuclear war, global climate catastrophe, and injustice. As you're joining us tonight, I invite you all to introduce yourself in our chat. I would love for you to please let us know what may have inspired you to join us tonight. Maybe you're an advocate, you just want to learn more, or maybe you happen to stumble upon this Zoom link and you're just seeing what's up for your Wednesday night. That's okay too. All answers are okay. To start us tonight, I believe it's important for us to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the land of unceded traditional lands of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. I honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. And tonight, as we work to honor and bring light to their ancient heritage and those of indigenous peoples worldwide, we must couple our work with action. So with that in mind, we know that tonight's topic in particular, climate and militarism, is one deeply rooted in the harmful impacts of colonialism and, of course, the coinciding generational harm and trauma that colonialism has caused, which a few of our speakers will certainly touch on further tonight. So we hope that you come away with a greater understanding, greater empathy, and of course, a host of actions that you can take to ensure we're all better stewards of the earth and its people. That said, I am happy to get us started. First, we will have some speakers that represent WPSR's work and each of its three programs: climate and health, economic inequity in health, and nuclear weapons abolition. We'll then transition into a panel on our core topic tonight, the harms of militarism on our climate and people. And finally, we will have some folks tell you about ways you can get involved right now. So I would also like to remind you to please keep yourself muted throughout our speakers. We have some folks monitoring our chat. We do plan to take questions after our speakers are finished. So that said, I am going to invite our first programmatic representative, Gleb Sitch, from our Economic Inequity and Health Task Force, to talk to you a little bit about what he does.
Hi, everyone. Like James said, my name is Gleb, and I'm a medical student at the Pacific Northwest University of Health Sciences in Yakima, Washington. I first became involved with WPSR through my school's Students for Human Rights and Social Responsibility Club, where our main focus was getting more of the student body involved in activism, particularly in matters pertaining to local city initiatives and advocacy-related work in Olympia. I became particularly interested in work centered on making Washington State's tax code more progressive, as we currently have the second most regressive tax code in the country, right after our lovely friends in Florida, according to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. And this ultimately led to me joining WPSR's Economic Inequity and Health Task Force. As a member of this task force, I'd like to briefly bring to your attention the relationship between not only military spending and climate, but how our overall tax base is managed. Military spending in this country is astronomical, but ultimately pales in comparison to the vast amounts of hoarded wealth that continues to go untaxed. The amount of wealth accumulated by billionaires in our country, for instance, throughout the pandemic, ballooned by trillions of dollars. While the working class continue to suffer and lose their wealth, the ultra-rich have been permitted to not only grow theirs, but to do so without paying taxes on it. As I briefly touched on before, folks from lower income brackets in our state continue to pay a disproportionately higher amount of their income in taxes compared to our state's wealthiest. The worst part is that a significant amount of those taxes goes towards an overfunded military and its weapons of mass destruction. So where could funds raised from taxing the wealthy and divesting in our military go towards? Combating the climate crisis for one, but also supporting the many underfunded social and safety net programs that help strengthen our communities. As our climate crisis continues to worsen, it will be communities with less resources that will be disproportionately affected. And I believe that making these intersectional changes in our funding priorities will help make these communities more resilient, while hopefully beginning to reverse the devastation that the climate crisis has already caused. And I will pass it on to our next speaker.
Our next speaker is Dr. Breck LeBeg from our Climate and Health Task Force. Go ahead, Breck.
Hello, everyone. I'm Breck LeBeg. I retired after a 30-year career as an Air Force flight surgeon, a doc for the pilots and other flyers. But I didn't start out that way. I actually applied for, but was denied conscientious objector status by my draft board when I turned 18 in the middle of the Vietnam War. My father was a decorated World War II combat engineer, Purple Heart and Bronze Star. He accompanied me to the hearing. Like most World War II vets, he never really talked about his war experiences, but later dedicated his life to civil rights issues by building a summer camp for Black kids in the Deep South. The KKK burned it down. He rebuilt it. I learned from his example. That's what you do. You right the wrongs in this world. I joined the Air Force partly to do that. Now, I'm not anti-military, but I do oppose military methods that do more harm than good, like nuclear war that can't possibly be won by anyone starting or fighting one. Fossil fuel waste that caused our climate crisis that can be replaced by carbon-free sources. So what can we do? Well, I told my U.S. Rep, Marilyn Strickland, to not spend my tax money on bombs to kill women and kids in Gaza. I led WPSR to oppose building a new 3,000-acre airport on Pierce County green space. I joined several rail groups to insist that Washington complete the Amtrak Cascades infrastructure to pull all that traffic off I-5, and opposed widening the Nisqually bridges that runs right by the Billy Frank Jr. Wildlife Refuge. In fact, to oppose any new highways. We're working with state legislators to do that. And last and most recently, I'm in a coalition to oppose the Navy Blue Angels spewing jet exhaust and noise at the crowded seafarer. So we can make a difference. To oppose militarization of police forces in the civilian side, to end fossil fuel use, to expand renewable energy sources, all by our individual examples, grassroots activism, and political action. So my request for you tonight, my ask is join us in whatever organization you're in to make your own difference in solidarity with others who care. Thank you for coming tonight. I look forward to our discussion.
Thanks very much, Brick. And lastly, from our Nuclear Weapons Abolition Task Force, we have Dr. Robin Naroon. Go ahead, Robin.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming this evening. I work with the Washington State Physicians for Social Responsibility, and specifically with the Physicians Nuclear Weapons Abolition Task Force. We work to organize civil society to educate and pressure our elected officials on nuclear weapon issues. And we aim to abolish nuclear weapons through education, policy, and advocacy. So I'm so glad to see you here tonight. And as a nurse researcher, this has been very compelling to me, but even more than that, being a person of Marshallese descent, working with the Nuclear Abolition Task Force has been incredibly gratifying, I would say. It has often felt as a Marshallese person that we are invisible to people and that we're not seen. So seeing people here is very gratifying to my heart. So, James, would you like to open up the panel?
Yeah, Robin, thank you so much. That's a little bit of an intro on our programs. If you're interested in any of them, of course, you can reach out to WPSR, info@wpsr.org, or of course, WPSR.org. Plenty of you are connected with us one way or another. So thank you for doing that. We are going to transition into our panel now, which is on the Marshall Islands, which we say the center of climate and nuclear weapons disaster. So with that, I think Sean is going to introduce our speakers, and then we will go right into it.
Yeah, thank you, James. My name is Sean Aaron. I manage our nuclear weapons abolition program here at WPSR. So this evening, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Robin Naroon, Rachel Hoffman, a leader in the Marshallese Women's Association, and B.L. Sowage, who is a youth coordinator for the Pacific Islander Community Association. Really pleased to have the three of these community leaders here with us, and I think you all will be very interested in what they have to say. So I'm going to hand it back to Robin to discuss a little bit about the intersections of climate, militarism, and economic inequity in the Marshall Islands and the Marshallese community.
Thank you, Sean. So you might wonder, what are the impacts of militarism and nuclear weapons on the Marshall Islands? And as a nurse researcher and as a Marshallese person, we have had so much impact in our islands because of these two things. So I'm a researcher who works on health equity. This work is so incredibly important to me and my community. I cannot imagine seeing these health inequities that I have seen in our community and not doing anything about it. So I think it would be fair to say that the Marshallese community is grateful to Washington State Physicians for Social Responsibility, and especially the Nuclear Task Force for the work that you do on it. So although that the nuclear testing happened more than 70 years ago, the effects still have a very profound effect on our community. Working with the task force enables us to work on system level changes that contribute to the well-being of our community and the world at large. So more than 70 years ago, the United States deployed nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands between the years of 1946 and 1958. The antecedents are to the diaspora of the Marshallese is exactly that: nuclear testing, climate change, and militarism. So between 1946 and 1958, the US dropped 67 nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands. And those tests yielded as much radiation as 1.6 Hiroshima bombings every day for 12 years. I want to pause there and just let that sink in a little bit. 1.6 Hiroshima bombings every day for 12 years. And although it was more than 70 years ago, it continues to ripple through our community. So for example, the nuclear legacy has left us with very high cancer rates. It's ruined the environmental degradation. So for example, much of the water is contaminated with radiation, the seawater, and the place where they are storing the nuclear waste is called the Runit Dome. And that Runit Dome is now cracked and leaking into the ocean. So obviously any food around there could be contaminated by radiation. So we also have had cultural dislocation. So we're sort of forced refugees because of the nuclear exposure and because of the disparate effects of climate change, which the US has really done very little to redress. Today, our largest island, which is called Kwajalein, is a US military base known as the Ronald Reagan Ballistic Missile Test Site, of which Marshallese are not allowed to live on or even go on without monitoring. The next closest island to Kwajalein, the military base, is called Ibai. And this is where Marshallese people are permitted to live. However, there is no fresh water on Ibai. So one must take a ferry to Kwajalein to get water every day. Life on Ibai is difficult. There's a lot of crowding and few resources. And this leads to poverty, food insecurity, changing social norms. No longer can we go out and fish or reap the fruit of agricultural efforts. And so with all this, food insecurity, poverty, and lack of opportunity, and because of the environmental degradation and the militarism, many people have immigrated to the United States. And here we experienced the broken COFA Treaty, which that treaty, when enacted, I think it was in 1983 or 86, allowed Marshallese to immigrate to the US freely and use benefits like Medicare, Medicaid. However, in 1996, under Bill Clinton's presidency and his welfare reform, we were inexplicably dropped from that eligibility. And it was not until 2020 that those benefits were reinstated. So that means for 24 years, our community members, despite all the health inequities arising from things that the Americans did in our land, including, using our largest island, Kwajalein, for a military base and the nuclear testing, we didn't have access to healthcare unless we were employed in a place that offered health insurance. But many of our elders simply did not have health insurance. And in a similar way, we've been impacted by climate change. Although we are a very small amount of the global carbon footprint, our islands, which lie only 3 to 7 feet above seawater, have felt a disproportionate effect from climate change. We experience these things called king tides, which are tides that go over the island. It basically floods the island. So you have, maybe water up to your knees until the tide recedes again. So our islands are basically drowning. And the other thing that happens with climate change is that it salinates the aquifer, so that the usual plants that we grow can't grow because it's too salty. And so I would say that our diet has changed from climate change, and this again contributes to food insecurity, waterborne diseases, and also the diet changes lead to very high incidence of diabetes. Fresh water is scarce on many of the islands. And of course, as I said, Kwajalein has water, but the next closest island, Ibai, does not. And so every day, Ibai residents have to go to Kwajalein to get water. All in all, the exposure to radiation and climate change has made us into forced refugees. And so when we come to the United States, we come with a lot of health inequities, and the policies and laws that have been made around our immigration have been oppressive. For example, dropping our ability to get healthcare benefits, despite the original COFA treaty, despite us giving up our biggest island, Kwajalein, and being exposed to nuclear radiation. So being colonized by 5 countries and enduring the nuclear testing and climate change have resulted in unfair policies such as that broken COFA treaty. So, here in the United States, we tend to be a relatively poor community. Often we're working 2 or more essential worker jobs. In fact, during COVID, we had a very high, like maybe the highest rate of COVID in the state. We represent 1% of Spokane population, but almost a third of their COVID cases. And so when you hear things like that, you have to ask what's going on. And I think what was happening is that we are crowded and we have to work essential jobs. We had no PPE, personal protective equipment, and a lot of us got COVID. In the Republic of the Marshall Islands, there's not a lot of opportunity to further ourselves because of the environmental degradation. So we've come here seeking opportunity. So, it's been, how do I say this? It's been very difficult because of all these structural factors that are not, you cannot attribute it to our culture, our individual behaviors, or our genetics. There's structural things like poverty, racism, colonialism, that have contributed to the poor effects in our community. I do want to kind of end this by saying one thing I would like you to know about my community is that we are incredibly resilient. We take care of our own. Our ancestral knowledge is deep, and many people might look at us as naive or nuclear savages. But I assure you, I think the Marshallese people are some of the kindest, most communitarian people in the world. And I just hope that we can change policy that will bring health equity to the Marshallese and to our world at large. So thank you for giving me this time to speak a little bit about the Marshall Islands and our people. I'd like to hand it over to Rachel now.
Hello, everyone. I just want to thank you all for being here tonight, and WSPR especially for elevating the voices of the Marshallese tonight. As Robin discussed, the Marshallese people are a very small population, and I love that she brought up the statistic about COVID. I know that we hear so much about it, and maybe it's become such a distant past, but it's really it just illuminates like how much we endure as a people, right? 1% of the Spokane population is Marshallese, yet a third of them were reported as Marshallese COVID cases. And you can think about like the underlying causes of that. Robin brought up the diet, right? She brought up the health issues. It's really difficult for our people to have quality access to healthcare. And so that really puts up a barrier for our people who are living in multi-generational homes. We also have an issue when it comes to access to employment, right? Because of our language barrier. So many of us speak Marshallese. There is, of course, a growing population that are speaking English, especially with our kids now who were born and raised here in the US, but still so many of the adults in our community speak mainly Marshallese. And so that gets into the way of applying for jobs. That gets into the way of pursuing like a driver's license, knowing how to navigate all systems, education, housing, healthcare. And the fact that we have so many barriers that are out of our power, like the documentation barrier, where if we don't have the I-94, then we won't be able to have access to so many things that all American citizens have access to, like healthcare, jobs. And of course, there were unemployment resources where so much of this became visible. There's just so much that we do not have access to. And to think about how we were this group of people who were used as guinea pigs for nuclear testing by the US government, and to not have all the resources that we need here, like for our children who grow up in the education system and then later are not able to apply for financial aid because they are not American citizens, are just completely blocked from moving forward in this economic ladder, right? And so as an educator, that's where my biggest concern is. How can we help our Marshallese students succeed? How can we help the future generation? And I'm also very concerned with the way that our people are not able to navigate the healthcare system very well. And this is something that we should all be very concerned with, right? Because as a people who are surviving and who are overcoming this nuclear legacy, we need a lot of support and we need a lot of help. And so that's all I'm going to say for now. Thank you so much for listening. I'll pass it back to Sean.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm actually going to pass it to BL Sowage.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Robin. And also thank you to everybody who came here today, and to WPSR for amplifying our voices and amplifying the voices of those who didn't have the chance to be heard. Those who have been impacted by radiations from the nuclear fallouts, those who have been impacted by all the testings that was done by the American government. A lot of the things that Robbie and I brought up are valid points of the healthcare system not being easily, not being accessible to a lot of our Marshallese folks. I work in the I work as a youth navigator, and I work with a lot of the youngins in Auburn, South King County. A lot of the Marshallese youth that I work with, they're facing a lot of language barriers and also cultural differences. Right, we were by here, especially I was by here at the age of 9, and when we talk about militarism and when we talk about climate change, I've seen climate change. My house used to be right there on the edge of the island where the ocean waves would hit the back of my house every night and they get louder and louder as months goes by, to a point where the house eventually is no longer standing. It rumbles now. I searched it up, I looked it up, and went on Google Maps. Now you can see the roads, and you can see how Marshall Island looks like. If you go on Google Maps and go look at it, I try to find my house. It's not there. The house that I grew up in till I was 9 years old is no longer standing. Is is rumbles, dust, because the ocean's coming in, and I hear stories from even like elders that I grew up around about the difference in climate change. How they say that the ocean used to be so far away from where we used to live in, where we used to be at, and then over the years, the ocean was slowly coming closer, closer, closer to the point where even graves was being washed away by the water. Not a lot of not a lot of folks talk about um, how much these small islands are impacted by climate change, and how much we're impacted by militarism. Even though we're such a small island, we're in such a perfect place for America to use as a middle point in between these big countries like China, Japan, and for military strategic moves, right? Um, but then we come here to America thinking that we're going to be getting better education, better healthcare, better uh, better diet, better whatever it is. And it's not like that. We come here to poverty. We come here to see school systems not treating or not trying to understand why we're here in the first place, not trying to understand the different language and different cultures that we have. Instead of sitting down and understanding this, they send us straight to detention, or they send us straight to uh, suspension, leading down to us not wanting to come to school no more, feeling very unsafe in that in that space. Um, honestly, I with these youth that I grew up, I'm growing up with, and I'm working with, I'm seeing a lot of the same cycle happening over and over. When we talk about militarism, climate change, a lot of these things is gonna, I mean, there's a lot that is not just impacting folks back on the islands. It's also impacting folks that are here already. Um, Folks who are coming here, they're not getting any resources that are delegated to them so that they can find better, or they can strive in this land that we're not from. I like how Robin said that we're very resilient. I like to think that we're kind of like coconuts. There's a story about how a coconut can float from one island to another, and once it wash up, it grows without the proper soil like other plants need, right? Um, that's how I like to see on Marshallese folks. We came from a very small island. We've been through a lot of challenges, a lot of barriers. We're here. We're trying to grow. We don't have the resources that we need to grow, but we're here. We're standing up. We're speaking out, making sure that our stories are heard, our voices are heard, and the barriers that we're facing are knocked down, right? And I appreciate WPSR for uh, holding this meeting today to make sure that we are heard. But yeah, I'm gonna pass it down back to Sean. Thank you all again.
Thank you, BL. So we have about 20 minutes for questions. If you have a question, please use the raise hand feature or type so in the chats. If you're somebody who talks a lot, try to step back. If you're somebody who talks a little, try to step forward. Breck, go ahead.
Sure. I'd like to ask the thank you very much to our speakers to talk to us about the Marshallese culture and the islands and the damage done. I'd like to understand the question of citizenship issue. After all of this and how we were treated and mistreated and moved, what's the status on ability to apply for citizenship if not born in the continental United States?
Rachel, are you able to chime in? I'll start us off and maybe Rachel can follow. I know that we can freely immigrate to the United States because of the COFA Treaty. So we can come here and we're called nationals. We're not considered citizens. And in terms of getting citizenship, I'm not sure if we're ever really considered a citizen, but only a national. BL, do you know anything about that?
I think that I'm pretty sure we have to wait at least a couple of years before trying to apply for citizenship. Um, but we are permanent resident. We do have that freely going back and forth from the Marshall Islands to here. Um, other than that, to become a citizenship though in America, you have to wait a couple of years. You have to live here for a couple of years. I don't know if it's 5 or 10 years before you can sign or uh, yeah, sign up to be a citizenship or take that test to be a citizenship to be a citizen. Yeah, I think that's what I know.
Thank you for that. I should have apologized in advance for asking what can be a very sensitive and indiscreet question. But I'm so concerned by what I heard that is why I tried to understand. Thank you all.
Thank you, Brack. And just as a point of information for folks, the Compact of Free Association is the treaty that governs the relationship between the U.S. and the Marshall Islands. And it was renewed just recently. And in that renewal, they reinstated some of the benefits that Marshallese folks can access while they're in the United States. So we're really happy about that.
I see that Mary, looks like she had a question sent to her that says, is there a strategy to recruit Marshallese to join military as an alternative to education, etc.? What I do know is that there is a very high enrollment of Marshallese youth into the military and a high mortality rate also. And I think it's one of the easiest, fastest, well, I don't know if it's easy, but one of the fastest ways to get citizenship. So there, I think there is a very high prevalence of youth going into the military. And then I'd invite BL and Rachel to add anything that they know.
I think that's one of the things that a lot of the either youth in the Marshall Islands, they or even not even youth, like a lot of adults in the Marshall Islands, they go into the military so that they can get citizenship or even find better jobs. A lot of the jobs back on the Marshall Islands, they their minimum rates are like $2, $3, or even 5 at most. But a lot of the food and groceries, they're very expensive. They're the same price or even more as here.
There's a question about the health of coral reefs and possibly marine life in the Marshall Islands. Folks are wondering probably how that was impacted by the nuclear tests.
I think one of the studies that I've seen is that with the nuclear testing alongside with like the ships that are coming in and out of the bays in the Marshall Islands, the coral reefs are they are dying. They're dying off, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of the high tides are coming in. Um, the coral reefs that used to be blocking the tide or slowing some of the waves down, they're dying off, breaking out, and the waves are coming in harder and they're rising. But I think that's what I've learned, and that's what I've seen in the study that's been done. Yeah.
And from a cultural perspective, some of our fishermen can see that there are much less fish that they're able to catch versus compared to 20 or so years ago. Somebody once said in Enowedak, where the Brunet Dome is, he used to be able to fish so much at their reefs, and now he would be lucky to even catch 5 fish in one sitting. So that tells us about the health of the marine life and the coral. And I do want to take this opportunity to talk about Kalena de Broom, who is the granddaughter of Tony de Broom, who recently passed away. Tony de Broom was he was the captain of this whole climate change political battle, and we're just so blessed in our country and in this world to just have them right in our lives and champion for us. So Kalena was the granddaughter. She recently passed away, and she was doing a lot of research on the marine health in the Marshall Islands, and it's a big loss to our community and to our country. She would have found out so much information that has not yet been discovered about the shifts of the marine life due to the impacts of climate change and our nuclear legacy.
Thank you for sharing that, Rachel. We have a question about data on the cost of externalities, which is always frankly hard to calculate. So the externalities of the U.S. military practices in the Marshall Islands. So maybe an idea of how much, if you can quantify it, how much damage was done through nuclear testing and colonization.
Oh, I don't really know what that would be. Sean, do you have, I always feel like you know a lot when it comes to nuclear. I mean, I know it's affected many of the islands and so many people. Like, I think I read somewhere that there's only like a third of Marshallese that reside in the Marshall Islands now. People have left because it's not feasible to live there. But that's not a quantitative number. Sorry about that.
I think probably the answer is just that people's lives are priceless, and
Right.
that there's probably no way to ever calculate that. There is a question that's similar, asking, what rights do the Marshall Islands have to land reparations, maybe reparations in general, and getting some of their land back, like on Kwajalein.
Oh, I don't think that would ever happen. I mean, I don't know if you can go up against the US military. And so many of the islands are ruined from the radiation exposure and from climate change that, if you got the island back, it would be underwater, right? There's another question. It says, if time, I have a question about Marshallese community strength in Washington as well as at home.
Yeah, Mary, do you want to unmute and ask it?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for giving me a minute to ask the question to any of the three presenters. It's really very moving to hear everything that you've taught us and share with us about your culture as well as the place. And Robin, you used the word, I think, communitarian, like some of the most kindest and most communitarian people you know. And I'm sure that BL, if I'm saying your name right, that you experience that a lot too, and that that those community connections are some of the first things to go in the face of militarism and climate refugees and stuff, and hard to maintain that community connection. But I heard Rachel speak of it too, and she referred to the the grandfather and his granddaughter and how much they're honored, you know, those sort of intergenerational things. But anything you could share with us about how you're managing to keep those community connections strong if you are in Washington State as well as back home?
Um, so I think the way Marshallese folks keep that connection strong within each other, uh, I feel like with our culture, a lot of the times we are very giving. We don't like to we don't like to say no when we're asked of things. We give and give until you're good. We know that you're good. And we're always connected when like when we had talked about how we came here, and a lot of the folks that are Marshallese folks, they go to like Arkansas, Springdale. A lot of community of Marshallese is over there in Springdale. Here, they like to stick together. We like to stick together, making sure that we're all good and staying under one roof, making sure that we are taking care of each other, paying whatever we need to pay to make sure that we have a roof over our head, right? Also, we have community events where um, during like summertime we have uh, sport teams where we come together and uh, make sure that also like during nuclear day we make sure that we recognize uh, the impact and get together and talk about it or even just to grieve about it. During May and June, a lot of the time we get together to play a lot of like sports, baseball, things like that, and like even with like church, religious. I think that's just how we are. We make sure that we're very connected, and even where we're thousands of miles apart, we send back food back to the islands, make sure that they're good on the island, send back money wherever it is. I think that's how we stick together. We make sure that everybody's good. Um, we always gather together every year. I think that's if that answers that question.
Thank you. Robin or Rachel, do you want to try to answer that as well?
Sure. Again, I think the Marshallese community it's so communitarian and it's so giving. So one of the things that I've always think that I juxtapose with the white side of my family is that when we have a birthday party, we give the people who come to the parents will give gifts to the people who come to the birthday party in thanks for helping raise the baby to the age of 1. And it's so different in the US where like you bring all these presents to one little baby who's not going to remember it, right? It's so different. It's like we really try to take care of each other and we give thanks, and the community is so tight knit that it's one of the most beautiful things about our culture is like we stay together. Yeah, it's just incredibly different.
Rachel wanted to give you the opportunity to answer that as well.
Okay, I'll just add one little thing. I asked my grandma one day what the most important part of our culture is, and she told me, quote, laleron. And what laleron means is to look after each other. And so that's the foundation of our culture, to watch over each other.
Thank you so much.
Sean, I'll just add too that there's an immense amount of gratitude when people help us or take care of us. You will be thanked over and over for that. So a lot of gratitude for what we do get. Thanks.
There's a comment from Mark saying that he did the math and U.S. aid sent to the Marshall Islands is 0.12% of what the U.S. spends annually on nuclear weapons and 0.01% of the overall military budget. And he was saying, given the harms from nuclear testing and the impacts of climate change, this is far from just. And I think we can agree on that. I don't see any other questions, so I'll go ahead and ask one. What is it, given what happened to the Marshall Islands and the Marshallese community, why did the three of you choose to speak out about nuclear weapons and speak out for your community, instead of just trying to survive? And why do you engage in advocacy? Why are you here tonight?
You have to call on one of us, Sean.
Robin, we'll start with you.
Okay. I mean, honestly, when I Public Health Seattle King County used to call me to come and help find Marshallese people who were lost to follow up. And when I started seeing what the real story was, what was really happening, it was just devastating. It's absolutely devastating. The injustices, like, for example, one man I picked up to help him get to Harborview, he got all the insurance re-enrollment in English, and he doesn't speak English. And, you know, things like if you go to this doctor's appointment, you're risking losing your job at the cannery. Like, that was really, truly real things that were happening. I saw families being told that they would be CPS if they didn't bring their kid to the doctor. And then when I would ask the doctor that, they would totally deny it. You know, I saw a lack of interpretation. So I guess when you see that happening over and over and over again, you can't just, I don't know how somebody could stand by and just watch it without doing something. I guess it soothes my soul to be doing something about it. To just sit back and do nothing would feel horrible. It just, I don't think I could do that.
Thank you, Robin. Beal?
I'd say what really started or what really kept me going on speaking out about nuclear abolishment and it's a fact that when I got into a lot of the work that I'm doing right now, whether that's in youth services, peer-to-peer support, things like that. Um, I came into this work because I was one of those youth that was going into the incarceration system. I saw my older brother get deported back to the Marshallese. I was next in line to get deported. The Auburn police was really not helping in the case of like trying to get at my father as well, making it really hard for me to go to school and doing this and that. And I was trying to figure out like what it is that why is it that I thought we came here because of better schooling, but honestly I didn't understand that we came here because of more reasons, nuclear testings, and I didn't know about or I heard of it but never really understood it to the level of how bad it was. And I think how that's how many of our youth and even elders in our community that don't understand that it was really bad. Like some of them think that thinks that their miscarriages that was from the nuclear fallout, the miscarriages that they had or cancers that they're having, they're thinking that it's because of black magic. Because in our culture, black magic was a very big thing back in the days. Um, they're not connecting it to the nuclear fallouts or the radiations and all that. So I guess when I started hearing and learning more about what the Americans did, the American government did to the Marshall Islands, and seeing how much it impacted our people, I was very angry at it. I mean, I wouldn't say that anger is pushing me. I mean, some part it is, yeah, anger. Anger is having me move to keep talking about and making sure that we are we get justice for what happened, and also to so that no other country or no other community of folks are impacted like our folks has been impacted, right? Um, but I think also just to see that the empowerment of me speaking out and giving voice to my people and representing for my people is very empowering. I feel really great. I love talking to my people. I love seeing my people. I love seeing my people get represented and getting what they deserve and getting the justice that they need, right? The resources that we need. That's what pushes me every day, and making sure that the next generation don't have to go through the same thing that I went through, um, just to be heard, right? Yeah.
Thank you. And Rachel, you'll have the last word.
Okay, so my grandma was one of the first librarians in the Marshall Islands, and in our first library in the Marshall Islands, we have also our first museum where she collected artifacts and curated them. And there was a lot of advocacy work that she had to do to get that going. And so she's also someone who had thyroid disease due to the fallout. And so she received some compensation for it. And because of that, she was able to fly here to the US with some of our family members. And that's how I was born here in the US. So I feel very privileged through that journey. And I would not be doing our family any justice if I weren't to continue that advocacy that she had started in our family line. And it's also so very needed. We are a very underspoken community as Marshallese people, and so wherever we get the chance to speak, we take it, right? And I'm talking about myself and BL and Robin and all of us who join hands across the nation or across the world, right? Who are given the opportunities from people like, people here like WPSR and our other awesome partners who are willing to let our story be shared. So it's also a way that I can kind of pass the torch to my students who I teach in schools to show that, hey, I really want you to learn your history. I really want you to learn about your identity and advocate for things that you need to in your community.
Thank you so much. Please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause, a virtual round of applause. Really appreciate the three of you for being here and sharing your stories. We wanted to end on the importance of speaking out and taking action, because we're actually going to transition into talking about ways that you can do that. There's no shortage of a need for people to engage on these issues. There's no shortage of a need of people who need to speak out and fight for justice. So I want to welcome up Timon Wallace, the executive director of nuclearban.us and the author of the book Warheads to Windmills. Timon coordinates the Warheads to Windmills Coalition, which brings together the issues of climate change and nuclear disarmament in a really interesting way. So Timon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you to Robin and Rachel and BL for sharing your stories and your voices and your culture. You mentioned Tony DeBroom. I don't know how many others here on this call have ever heard him speak, but he was a great inspiration over many years on both the fossil fuel and the nuclear abolition movements, and in particular with the negotiations which led to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The Marshall Islands has been a very important voice in these conversations, and even this past year, we've seen groups of young people from the Marshall Islands being involved in the treaty, including the new proposals for a fossil fuel treaty. So the Marshall Islands are a great inspiration to me personally, and the people from the Marshall Islands, and of course the injustices that they've suffered, and the fact that they've been through what we're all facing. I mean, the nuclear fallout from testing, the impacts from climate change. These are facing us all, and so they've been through it, and their experiences are informing us of what we're up against and what we need to be doing to address it. So I was asked to share a little bit about the legislation in Congress that links these two existential threats together, and our campaign focusing on the companies involved and the coalition that we're very glad to have Washington PSR as a partner in. So if I could share my screen, I'll see if I can do that and show you a few slides just to accompany. We don't like killing birds, so we feed two birds with one scone, but we're talking about these two hugely important and dangerous threats to humanity. And we've heard several people were talking just now about the cost. I mean, the military budget is unbelievably huge, but most people have very little idea about how much of that is actually being consumed by nuclear weapons right now. We heard back in the 90s or early 2000s the what was called the $1 trillion triad. So this idea that we need to build all of our entire three legs of the nuclear weapons in this country, and it was going to cost $1 trillion over 30 years. Well, we're now already partway through that program, but it's already, as you can see, if you can see the slide, I don't know, but at the bottom there, that's 1.2 trillion just for the next 10 years. And we're talking now, this cost has almost tripled in just a few years to now $3 trillion over the next 30 years, just dedicated to the nuclear weapons program. It's just phenomenal amounts of money that are being wasted. And just as an example, here's one way we could be spending that money instead on climate. We know, I mean, the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed in Congress committed over 250 billion over 10 years. So that's 25 billion a year. But we need vastly more than that, really, to address the deep problems that we have, including the global contribution that we promised to send 3 billion, and we need to be sending. We've only sent 2 so far to the global fund for helping other countries to make this transition, but we need to be committing way more than that, and all these other areas that were not touched by the Inflation Reduction Act, like planting trees, public transportation. There's so many things. This is just a sample of how we could spend that money that we're wasting on nuclear weapons. But it's not just the money, it's the jobs, the brain power, the scientists and engineers and technicians who are being hired right now as we speak by companies like Raytheon and General Dynamics and so on to build a whole new generation of nuclear weapons. We need that talent and that brain power to be addressing the challenges that we still face with the climate crisis. I mean, we know how to make electricity with wind and solar and water, but there's many aspects to this problem that need still to be resolved. And this is just just sampling. This is all in my book, by the way, but this is just a sampling of the kinds of jobs that are out there for the green transition to a green economy, vastly more than are being used by nuclear weapons. But it's not just the numbers of jobs, it's the people and the skills that we really need. These STEM students coming out of university, science, technology, engineering, maths, to be putting their creativity and their energy into solving these challenges. And of course, on top of the money and the jobs, the most important thing that link these two issues is the fact that the top greenhouse gas emitters in the world, China, Russia, us, India, Europe, these are where nuclear weapons are pointing at each other. And unless we find a way of collaborating, and that means a lot more than having meetings with China and then slapping 100% tariffs on their electric vehicles and so on. We've got to work together with these countries if we're going to solve the climate crisis. There's absolutely no way we can do it on our own, or any country can do it on their own. And unless we address this animosity that's fueled right now by the Ukraine war, but there are many other challenges that we're facing, as we all know, with China and so on. We have to get beyond this militarist war mentality and start collaborating. And many of you will know that there's lots of legislation in Congress. Most of it goes absolutely nowhere. But there is a bill. This is Eleanor Holmes Norton from Washington, D.C. She can put bills into Congress. She can't vote on them because she's not, D.C. doesn't have the full status in Congress, but she can put her bill in. It's called H.R. 2775. She's been putting this bill in for over 20 years, calling on the U.S. to work with other countries to eliminate all nuclear weapons and to put all those resources into addressing climate and other pressing social needs. So this is our Warheads to Windmills bill. We're working hard to convince members of Congress, and you can all write to your member of Congress about this. There are other bills, as you know, the Back from the Brink resolution. There are loads of bills about divesting from fossil fuels and other ways of, the Green New Deal resolution and so on. But this is our focus. And at the same time, we know that we're not going to get what we need from Congress until we address the companies that are pouring their millions into influencing Congress and influencing us through the media and so on, to keep things as they are. There's just a whole complex. There's been lots of research on the amounts of money that is going into in election finance and lobbying and so on. But we have to focus on these companies. And the good news is that we have lots of tools to do it. We know the companies. In the 1980s, there were a couple hundred companies in the nuclear weapons business. Now there's only a couple dozen, and they're up right there. We know who they are. If you're involved in the fossil fuel divestment movement, you'll know there's 200 companies in the carbon underground, carbon 200, but there's actually a much smaller number who are the ones showing here, who are putting these millions into preventing Congress from doing the right thing in the White House. So we have the targets. We know what we can do. We have lots of tools. Divestment, as you probably know, trillions have been divested from fossil fuels, and that is having an impact, unquestionably. About a tenth of that amount, so 4 trillion as opposed to 40 trillion, have been divested from nuclear weapons. But this includes the pension funds from New York City. It includes some of the largest pension funds in the world that are based in Europe, and some of the big European banks and so on, faith communities, colleges. But we need much more of this if we're going to really put the pressure on these companies. And this is where I want to just make a plug for the doctors in the room and the medical profession, because all of these companies, fossil fuel and nuclear weapons companies, make medical equipment. They make PPE, they make all kinds of equipment for hospitals and for emergency paramedics and so on, because they want to be seen to be helping the community, saving lives, doing the right thing. These companies want the reputation of being doing the right thing, when they're the very companies that are threatening this planet, literally. And we've got to make it clear to them that it's not acceptable to be claiming to be saving lives and to be threatening to destroy the planet. So we really need hospitals and medical professions to start boycotting these companies and saying we're not going to buy our PAP machine, CPAP machine from Honeywell or whatever it is, because we want you to stop making nuclear weapons. And that could be a very powerful message. So in short, climate and nuclear weapons, they both threaten the entire planet. We could use the money and the jobs and the resources from one to solve the other. It's a no-brainer. We can't solve either without cooperation with Europe, Russia, and China. And the Ukraine war, as I mentioned, has not only raised the specter of nuclear war much higher than it's been, but it's also put back the agenda on climate enormously by years, if not decades, because of the priorities shifting and dropping all the commitments to meet these more immediate needs to replace Russian gas and so on. Both climate and nuclear weapons require urgent, bold, radical action. We have to work to support the treaty that eliminates nuclear weapons, and we have to support the treaty that's being negotiated or being proposed right now to phase out the burning of fossil fuels. No more time for baby steps and little. We've got to be calling out these needs to save the planet, and we know that it's the corporations that are getting in the way of that, and we also know that we have the power to pressure these corporations. And I want to just end by sharing how we're working together with the coalition. We're working internationally. These treaties have massive support in other countries, and that's our great resource. But we're trying to build these coalitions. We have a national coalition, and we also have a state coalition in Massachusetts, and we're trying to get some started in some other states to really focus down on what we can do at the local level, national level, state level, with colleges, with faith communities and so on, to really put pressure on the companies and through them on our members of Congress. So these are some of the organizations, as you can see down there somewhere, I think is, hopefully it's on there, the Washington PSR. But anyway, there's about 40 organizations now as part of our coalition. And as I said, we're working with other countries. We're not just doing this ourselves. And the fact that these other countries are putting pressure on the companies. I have this example. I mean, I won't go through all the different stages of the countries that are connected to the treaty, but you can see this is where Honeywell has operations. Every one of these countries has operations. They have suppliers, investors, projects, contracts in these other countries, factories, and these other countries are putting pressure. This is Airbus, one of the European companies making nuclear weapons, but a country like Ireland. So this is a law in Ireland right now that prohibits anything to do with nuclear weapons in Ireland. And as you can see here, the penalty, A, a fine, or B, imprisonment for life or such lesser term as may be determined. But I mean, you could get life in prison in Ireland for having anything to do with nuclear weapons, including investments. So we're hoping that we can push these companies to the point where they feel threatened enough from countries like Ireland, from colleges like Hampshire College and cities like Oakland, California, who are putting pressure on these companies to say, stop telling Congress that we need to keep forever building nuclear weapons and fossil fuel infrastructure. We've got to change that. And we have this strategy of pincer movement, the treaties and the countries and the laws from other countries, and what we can do in this country, putting pressure on these companies to actually get what we need. And so to finish, we have this dream, we have the dove of peace. We all want a world without nuclear weapons and without the burning of fossil fuels. But that, having a dream is not enough. We need a dove with teeth. And we have it. We have the nuclear ban treaty. It's very powerful. It has penalties. It has legal requirements. We have tools like divestment and boycotting and stigmatizing. And if we can build a mass movement, we can do this. So this is all in my book. You can join the meetings that we have every month. We just had our meeting immediately before this webinar of our national coalition, and other organizations are invited to join. We're trying to build this link with climate and anti-nuclear groups to work together on how we address these things. And what you're doing here is a great example. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Tim. We will have some time for questions at the end of this program, but next I want to gear us towards a local campaign. So I want to invite up Mary Patterson, an organizer with 350 Seattle and the Seattle Anti-War Coalition.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much, Sean, and everybody at WPSR for organizing this fascinating panel preceding me and Timon's presentation as well. I'm going to, as Sean said, focus on something very local to the Seattle area. For those of you who live in Seattle or the Seattle area. And that is a campaign that sprang up just last summer, actually, to be a physical presence at the Blue Angels Air Show, which happens every year as part of Seattle Seafair. These are some of the organizations who were involved in that and are still involved in that. Veterans for Peace, the local Daniel Ellsberg chapter, 350 Seattle that I'm a member of, Extinction Rebellion, and the Seattle Anti-War Coalition. 350 Seattle is actually a member of two local anti-war coalitions. One is Seattle Anti-War Coalition, and the other is Washington Against Nuclear Weapons. And that's because we've really become very interested and committed to understanding the intersection of climate change and militarism. They are twin threats, it's true, but they are also very integrated with each other. They have a lot to do with each other. And I'm not going to get into that much with this presentation. You can go on to the next slide, please, Sean. This is what it looked like last summer at Genesee Park on Lake Washington. I should say it's also Hachu, which is the name of Lake Washington in the Lushootseed language. I'm trying to do more of that in my own kind of thinking about where I live. But this is what it looked like last year. There were about 15 people who came out, which was a good showing for something that was organized in about 4 to 6 weeks. And we actually were covered by the media. Cairo and Como News both covered our protest. We reached out to a lot of people on that day, on that pair of days. And we'll be out there again this summer, August 3rd and 4th. So please save those dates if you'd like to join us. We're just beginning to plan that presence now. You can go ahead, Sean, and go on to the next slide. So why no military air shows, no MAS? No MAS is a phrase that was coined actually by Veterans for Peace San Diego, which began a campaign in their own area. It's the Miramar Air Show down there, where either the Navy Blue Angels or the Air Force Thunderbirds perform. And they weren't getting a whole lot of traction. They've been protesting this for a number of years until they started centering climate as the message. Climate impacts of the military air shows. And then they began to get a whole lot of interest from climate environmental groups in the San Diego area. Veterans for Peace nationwide has a climate crisis and militarism project, which you can find out about by going to their website. Lots of resources there. And through that, we heard about this No MAS campaign. And we decided we would begin it in our own locale, which is Seattle and King County in Washington State. And we decided to focus on climate and health. Thanks, Sean. So what are the climate impacts and health impacts of the Blue Angels? It's approximately, and it's hard to judge because the Blue Angels are now Super Hornets rather than the Hornets that they used to fly. It's a bigger plane, 25% bigger than the old plane. So some of this data is a bit old and maybe an underestimate, but it's approximately 70,000 gallons of jet fuel per weekend air show. And that translates to about 680 metric tons, maybe 700 metric tons of carbon emissions for every weekend air show. Really importantly, I've learned from 350 Seattle Aviation Work Group that carbon emissions from aviation actually have a much greater impact on global warming than carbon emissions from, say, trucks and cars and heating and that kind of thing, because it's in the air. And the global warming effect is 3 times greater. So that comes down to about the equivalent of about 30 cars driving 150,000 miles each. So roughly the whole lifespan of 30 cars is what the Blue Angels emit in one weekend show. Perhaps a drop in the bucket, you might say, but let's move on to the next slide to review some of the other impacts and why we are very focused on ending the Blue Angels in the Seattle Seafair. One is the effect of jet fuel particulate matter. Many of the physicians and others, healthcare researchers and all on this call will already know that jet fuel particulate matter is closely linked with lung and heart disease, greater rates of cancer, and shorter lifespans. We know, we're looking at this map here, and I want you to note that on the left side of the map, you'll see the King County International Airport in blue there. We know that for 10 miles around that airport, there is a health impact. Actually, at that airport, there's even leaded fuel being used in some of the planes, and that is still being assessed at how much those lead, the impact of the leaded fuel is having an impact on children in particular in that area, up or downwind of the airport. Now to noise pollution. On this map too, you'll see that the red marker on the right side is Island Park Elementary School on Mercer Island. That is where a year or two ago, noise levels were measured during the Blue Angels show that showed that there was like more than 10 measurements of over 90 decibels. And over 70 decibels, we know over long term can be harmful to hearing, especially to children whose hearing is still developing. And these were measurements for over 90 decibels, 10 different times. Noise pollution, the sound of the Blue Angels, even apart from that kind of physiological impact, is experienced as threatening to children who don't understand the sound, survivors of war, and Seattle prides itself on being welcoming to refugees. Many of these refugees are survivors of war. People with sensory processing disorders like autism and ADHD also suffer from this huge noise impact of the Blue Angels. And as many people know who have pets, animals are stressed by it, and so are birds. At Seward Park, right where the air show audience gathers, is a Seattle Audubon Society. Marine animals are also impacted by noise pollution. That's been recently written up in the Seattle Times, which did a study of the growlers up on Whidbey Island, another very noisy military plane. And the impact of that noise even impacts marine animals. So air pollution and noise pollution, along with carbon emissions, are our focus currently. But in the next slide, I wanted to point out a couple of other things having to do with the military air show. Oh, this is a larger map that I can make available to anybody who'd like to have it. In fact, it wouldn't be me making it available. It would be Washington Against Nuclear Weapons, who developed this map for our use. But you can see that what we're concerned about in Seattle is just one small piece of the larger puzzle in the map of Washington and all the different military installations of various kinds, including nuclear legacy. Next slide, Sean. Yeah, so the role of Boeing. Boeing is one of the corporations that Timon's presentation just before me included, but it has a very big role in the Seafair celebrations at Seattle, and in particular, the air show. Boeing sits on the Seafair board. It's a major funder. It's a major funder of many institutions across the country and probably the world, but particularly in Seattle. So when we're going to those different organizations, say in Seattle, especially in the Rainier Valley area, I think some of them will be very hard pressed to join our campaign to end the Blue Angels because they receive funding from Boeing. Boeing also builds the Blue Angel Super Hornets planes, not in Seattle as far as my research goes, but in St. Louis. And Seattle is known as the hometown of Boeing. So there's this sort of quote unquote pride and professionalism that the Seafair Board takes in having the military air show, the Blue Angels Air Show. The Pacific Northwest has the third largest military presence in the nation. Seafair Board has a close relationship with the Navy in particular, which we recently learned about when we met with 2 members of the Seafair Board. And so they are reluctant to give up this close relationship if we were to work with them on reimagining Seafair, as we're trying to do. Sorry, here we go. Sean, you can go on. Oh, I guess don't go on to the next slide. I wanted to point out that what the photograph is about. Excuse me, though. This is important because when we went to Seafair ourselves to get the lay of the land before we launched our protest on Saturday and Sunday, we went in the gates on the free day, which is Friday, and we saw a remarkable military presence at Seafair. All branches of the military do a lot of recruiting, both at the Military Air Show at Lake Washington and also during Fleet Week on the Sound. And so one thing you have to say at the very least about the military presence at Seafair is that it has an outsized presence. Yes, as people earlier in the presentations tonight noted, the military offers education opportunities to a lot of youth. A lot of families are ingrained with the military in that way. We are not, as an organization, talking about demilitarizing Seafair, partly because we don't want to alienate a whole lot of people, but it is a fact that the military has an outsized role in Seafair, and you really see it when you go to the air show. Next slide, Sean. Thanks. I'm looking at the time here and realizing this is my last slide. I'm going to wrap up, but please take a look at this slide. We invite you, anybody individually or the organizations that you're involved in, to work with us in the Seafair Climate Action Coalition, which is the name of our coalition. And there's our Gmail address, cclimateaction@gmail. If you send us an email, we can help connect you to our work, and you can see if it's a good fit for you or not. We meet with decision makers in the city of Seattle as well as the Seafair Board. You might want to hold Seafair visioning sessions in your own communities for what a Seafair could look like that didn't have the Blue Angels. And please join us to help plan our protest this summer, which may also be not only a protest against the Blue Angels, what we don't want continued, but a picnic of sorts where we can celebrate our communities in a way that we want Seafair to become more safe, more healthy, more celebratory of Seattle's communities. And we might begin that sort of tradition at the air show somehow this summer on August 3rd, 4th. There will be a petition that we're revising right now that will be circulating. And please get ready to write letters to the editors and op-eds in your own newspapers or some of the local papers that I've listed here. So again, please reach out to us by emailing us at cclimateaction@gmail.com. And I hope that this presentation was at least a little window onto what we're working on this summer and what the stakes are for ending the military air show in Seattle. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mary. Last but not least, I want to hand it to my colleague, Lily, to talk a little bit about what WPSR has going on.
Great. And I know we only have a couple minutes, so if there were questions in the chat, Sean, if you want to look through and see. Cool. So I'm gonna share my screen really quickly. Did that work? Okay, I think so. All right. First I wanted to just thank everyone for coming tonight and thank our amazing speakers, Robin, BL, and Rachel. You were a truly incredible panel. Timon and Mary, thanks for sharing what actions are going on. I'm Lily. I, she, her pronouns. I'm the Economic Inequity and Health Program Manager with WPSR. And we just wanted to share a few quick actions you can take tonight, ways to get involved, and let you know what's coming next with our work at the intersections of our programs. So this first one's an action. The new Sentinel nuclear missile is estimated to cost $264 billion over its 50-year life cycle. This is enough money to cancel all current U.S. medical debt with funds to spare. We're joining forces with National PSR to do just that. You can use this link, which I'll drop all these links in the chat at the end, or you can use the QR code to contact your members of Congress to learn more. And actually, it's going to be confusing if I do all the links in the chat at the end, so I'm going to do it now. YouTube. Here you go. All right. You can also join our conversation about this locally, Saturday, June 1st at Plymouth Circle Church in Seattle, June 21st in Bellingham, and July 6th in Everett. And next, we wanted to talk about an ongoing cross-program effort at the Washington state level on a totally different topic, but again, at one of the many intersections of the 3 programs we have at WPSR. And so there's this November, these 3 dangerous initiatives are going to be on our ballots in Washington. Basically, one multimillionaire spent a lot of money to get these on the ballot. And between the 3 of them, if they pass, they would remove crucial education funding, climate investments, and long-term care benefits. We'll be holding an event later this summer, and we hope you'll join us to take action and protect health in our state. You can learn more about these initiatives and take action by going to this website that we've created. So check it out. I also want to share one quick action today. The No on I-2124 campaign, which is the one that will protect long-term care, is looking for healthcare provider endorsements. And I know many of you are in the healthcare sphere. So I want to drop a link for that. And if you would like to sign, that would be amazing. And then we wanted to share how you can get more involved in our work at WPSR. You can sign up for emails and action alerts. I'm sure many of you are already on this list and we appreciate you. You can also join a task force, become a member, follow us on social media, or donate. And we hope you'll join us at our gala on October 26th, as well as our event on initiatives later this summer. And with that, I will pass it back to you, Sean.
All right, I imagine, I know at least for Tim, and it's pretty late on the East Coast, but we want to give a little bit more time for questions for Mary and Tim. And so if you have some, here's the opportunity. Don, did I see a hand?
Yeah. I was just saying that Representative Adam Smith had just recently published an essay. Was it Newsweek or
Yep.
Politico or someplace like that? I forget where it was. I don't think it was a very good essay. He called, but he does acknowledge that the Sentinel land-based missiles are he said it's a waste of money, but he wants to put the money into submarine-based missiles, which is, I don't think it's any better. But so I asked him, well, why don't you support, we should ask him, why don't you have diplomacy or start nuclear arms treaties instead? But anyway, he's somebody who's actually, who probably would meet with you people and so you can set up a meeting with him. I think that could be arranged to set up. He's no relation to me, but I've set up meetings with him before. So I suggest that some of the nuclear activists here, contact me. I'll put my email there, and I probably could arrange a meeting with him. You probably have had meetings. Have you had meetings with him already?
Well, Don, I that's actually how that op-ed came about, is from us meeting with him.
Oh, I didn't hear about that. So that's interesting to know. But
we did not recommend the submarine missile thing, but we did did ask him to oppose the Sentinel publicly through an op-ed. So
oh, great. Well, I'm surprised you didn't. I mean, I missed part of this meeting because I got a phone call. Did you mention this before?
no, but so thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you.
Will.
A couple of people had comments about Mary's presentation. David and Patty, we will pursue those questions at our next meeting and hopefully have answers for you sometime down the road.
Awesome. All right. I see some comments. Last call for questions. Going once. Going twice. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. I really hope you take action through some of the channels we've provided. And let's all continue to speak out about the intersections of climate, militarism, and economic inequity.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Sean, Lily, and James for hosting.
Great
Thank
session.
you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You guys will go on.
Thanks, everybody. That was wonderful. Really glad to see you all.
Agree. That was excellent. Thank you.